But this aggression cannot go unanswered. If it did, the consequences for America would be much worse. America stands up to bullies. We stand up for freedom. This is who we are. Let me also repeat the warning I made last week. If Russia pursues cyber attacks against our companies, our critical infrastructure, we are prepared to respond. For months, we've been working closely with the private sector to harden our cyber defenses, sharpen our ability to respond to Russian cyber attacks as well. I spoke last night to President Zelensky of Ukraine, and I assured him that the United States, together with our allies and partners in Europe, will support the Ukrainian people as they defend their country. We'll provide humanitarian relief to ease their suffering. And in the early days of this conflict, Russia propaganda outlets will keep trying to hide the truth and claim success for its military operation against a made-up threat. But history has shown, time and again, how swift gains in territory eventually give way to grinding occupations, acts of mass civil disobedience, and strategic dead ends. The next few weeks and months will be hard on the people of Ukraine. Putin has unleashed a great pain on them. But the Ukrainian people have known 30 years of independence, and they have repeatedly shown that they will not tolerate anyone who tries to take their country backwards. This is a dangerous moment for all of Europe, for the freedom around the world. Putin has committed an assault on the very principles that uphold the global peace. But now, the entire world sees clearly what Putin and his Kremlin allies are really all about. This was never about a genuine security concerns on their part. It was always about naked aggression, about Putin's desire for empire by any means necessary, by bullying Russia's neighbors through coercion and corruption, by changing borders by force, and ultimately by choosing a war without a cause. Putin's actions betray his sinister vision for the future of our world, one where nations take what they want by force. But it is a vision that the United States and freedom-loving nations everywhere will oppose with every tool of our considerable power. The United States and our allies and partners will emerge from this stronger, more united, more determined, and more purposeful. And Putin's aggression against Ukraine will end up costing Russia dearly, economically and strategically. We will make sure of that. Putin will be a pariah on the international stage. Any nation that countenances Russia's naked aggression against Ukraine will be stained by association. When the history of this era is written, Putin's choice to make a totally unjustifiable war on Ukraine will have left Russia weaker and the rest of the world stronger. Liberty, democracy, human dignity, these are the forces far more powerful than fear and oppression. They cannot be extinguished by tyrants like Putin and his armies. They cannot be erased by from people's hearts and hopes by any amount of violence and intimidation. They endure. In the contest between democracy and autocracy, between sovereignty and subjugation, make no mistake, freedom will prevail. God bless the people of a free and democratic Ukraine, and may God protect our troops.
Mr. President.
Associated Press, Zeke.
So do you have any plans to speak with President Putin at this point, and what interactions have you had with the Russian government?
I heard the first part. Do I have any plans to speak with Putin at this point, and what?
What communications have you had with the Kremlin as far as military operations in Ukraine and making sure this does not spiral into a larger conflict?
Well, it's a large conflict already. The way we're going to ensure it's not going to aspire to a larger conflict is by providing all the forces needed in the Eastern European nations that are members of NATO. NATO is more united than it's ever been, and I have no plans to talk with Putin. Wall Street Journal, Tarina.
Mr. President, you didn't mention SWIFT in your sanctions that you announced. Is there a reason why the U.S. Isn't doing that? Is there a disagreement among allies regarding SWIFT and whether Russia should be allowed to be a part of it?
The sanctions that we have proposed on all their banks are of equal consequence, maybe more consequence than SWIFT, number one. Number two, it is always an option, but right now that's not the position that the rest of Europe wishes to take. Cecilia Vega, ABC.
Sir, sanctions clearly have not been enough to deter Vladimir Putin to this point. What is going to stop him? How and when does this end? And do you see him trying to go beyond Ukraine? And a second question I'll just give to you now. This statement that he gave last night, the threat that he gave, the West will face consequences greater than any you have faced in history. Is he threatening a nuclear strike?
I have no idea what he's threatening. I know what he has done, number one. And number two, no one expected the sanctions to prevent anything from happening. It has to show, this is going to take time, and we have to show resolve so he knows what's coming. And so the people of Russia know what he's brought on them. That's what this is all about. This is going to take time. It's not going to occur. He's going to say, oh my God, these sanctions are coming, I'm going to stand down. He's going to test the resolve of the West to see if we stay together, and we will. We will, and it will impose significant costs on him.
Will he go beyond Ukraine, sir? Do you see him going beyond?
Yes.
Thank you. Two topics, just really quick. First, markets are down and gas prices are up. I know you always stress the difference between Wall Street and Main Street, but everybody seems to be in for some economic pain. How economically painful is it going to get for people in this country? And I do have one more question.
First of all, there's no doubt that when a major nuclear power attacks and invades another country, that the world is going to respond, and markets can respond all over the world. So there's no doubt about that, number one. Number two, the notion that this is going to last for a long time is highly unlikely as long as we continue to stay resolved in imposing the sanctions we're going to impose on Russia, period. What's the next question? I'm sorry.
The next question is, did you underestimate Putin, and would you still describe him the way that you did in the summer as a worthy adversary?
At the time, he was, I made it clear, as an adversary, and I said he was worthy. I didn't underestimate him. And I've read most of everything he's written. Did you read? I shouldn't. I'm not being a wise guy. You heard the speech he made. Almost an hour's worth of speech is why he was going into Ukraine. He has much larger ambitions in Ukraine. He wants to, in fact, reestablish the former Soviet Union. That's what this is about. And I think that his ambitions are completely contrary to the place where the rest of the world has arrived.
And with these ambitions, you're confident that these devastating sanctions are going to be as devastating as Russian missiles and bullets and tanks?
Yes, Russian bullets, missiles, and tanks in Ukraine. Yes, I am.
Thank you, President Biden. If sanctions cannot stop President Putin, what penalty can?
I didn't say sanctions couldn't stop him.
You've been talking about the threat of these sanctions for several weeks now.
Yes, but the threat of the sanctions and imposing the sanctions and seeing the effect of the sanctions are two different things. They're two different things. And we're now he's going to begin to see the effect of the sanctions.
And what will that do? How will that change his mindset here, given he's attacking Ukraine?
Because it will so weaken his country that he'll have to make a very, very difficult choice as to whether to continue to move toward being a second-rate power or, in fact, respond.
You said in recent weeks that big nations cannot bluff when it comes to something like this. You recently said that the idea of personally sanctioning President Putin was on the table. Is that a step that you're prepared to take? And if not,
it's not a bluff, it's on the table.
Sanctioning President Putin?
Yes.
Why not sanction him today, sir?
Mr. President?
Why not sanction him today, sir?
Mr. President, if I can, you detailed some severe and swift new sanctions today and said the impact it will have over time. But given the full-scale invasion, given that you're not pursuing disconnecting Russia from what's called SWIFT, the international banking system, or other sanctions at your disposal, respectfully, sir, what more are you waiting for?
Specifically, with the sanctions we've imposed exceed SWIFT. The sanctions we imposed exceed anything that's ever been done. The sanctions we imposed have generated 2/3 of the world joining us. They are profound sanctions. Let's have a conversation in another month or so to see if they're working. Yes.
Can I ask you about Zelensky? Sir, you spoke to Vladimir Zelensky yesterday, sir.
What's the risk that we are watching the beginning of another Cold War, and is there now a complete rupture in U.S. and Russian relations?
There is a complete rupture right now in U.S.-Russian relations if they continue on this path that they're on. And in terms of a Cold War, that depends. You have the vast majority of the rest of the world in total opposition to what he's doing, from Asia to South America to Europe to around the world. And so it's going to be a cold day for Russia. The idea, you don't see a whole lot of people coming to his defense.
And are you, if I could follow up, sir, are you urging China to help isolate Russia? Are you urging China to help isolate Russia?
I'm not prepared to comment on that at the moment. No. Yeah. No. He's had his hand up a long time.
Thank you, Mr. President. How concerned are you that Putin wants to go beyond Ukraine into other countries, and the U.S. will have to get involved if he moves into NATO countries?
Well, if he did move into NATO countries, he will be involved. We will be involved. The only thing that I'm convinced of is if we don't stop now, he'll be emboldened. If we don't move against him now with these significant sanctions, he will be emboldened. And look, you know, well, anyway.
And can you talk anything more about your conversation? Mr. President.
Why not sanction Putin directly today?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Sir, India, which is a major defense partner of the United States, is India fully with you on the issue of Ukraine and Russia?
Does the Defense Department of the United States?
So India is one of your major defense partners. Is India fully in sync with the United States on Russia?
We're in consultation with India today. We haven't resolved that completely.
One more question.
Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you.
My press colleagues certainly hungry for questions and answers, and a lot, frankly, to go through here. The president addressing the nation one more time, announcing a whole new round of sanctions. He calls them significant sanctions that will make it difficult, designed to make it difficult for Russia to operate in the marketplace and make financial transactions across the world. There are export limitations. The president talking about things that would maximize the long-term impact on Russia. The president addressing the nation after meeting with G7 leaders, suggesting there's not a lot of daylight between the partners as they approach next steps toward Russia, although acknowledging that the idea of moving Russia out of the SWIFT banking system, that's a intermediary that allows banks to transfer funds between each other, that necessarily doesn't have the full support of allies. But he says the sanctions they've announced exceed moving against that SWIFT membership. Let's bring in NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Kristen Welker. Kristen, I just ticked off a couple of the headlines here. A lot packed into this briefing.
There is a lot to unpack, Lester, and I think that you hit some of the big highlights here. Let's talk about what happened and what didn't happen. President Biden announcing strong new sanctions against some of the largest financial institutions in Russia. That on top of the sanctions that he announced against financial institutions earlier this week. He also announced that they are targeting elites, oligarchs who are close to Vladimir Putin. All of this will have an impact on Putin himself, and he announced new sanctions on export controls. That is something that could impact Russia's aerospace and defense systems. So the president making the case, look, these are robust. They are in consultation with our allies and partners, and so they will bite. But what he didn't do, what you underscored, Lester, and what Peter pressed the president on, why not kick Russia out of SWIFT right now. This is something that Democrats and Republicans have been calling for. And he said that, look, there has been disagreement among some of the European allies about taking this step. Why? Because their economies are so intertwined with Russia, and they're concerned that ultimately it could hurt their economies as well. So that is something that they continue to grapple with. I thought it was significant that you heard the president defend his strategy and say that what is still on the table is sanctioning Putin himself. He is getting a number of calls to sanction Putin himself, again, from Democrats and Republicans. Adam Schiff saying overnight, what is the president waiting for? Why not do this now? He's, of course, atop Democrats, and Republicans have for weeks been calling on the president to get tougher. So you really heard him defend why he believes this strategy is working. He says it's not a deterrent, but ultimately he thinks that it will have an impact. And then finally, Lester, I would just note that he braced Americans for more pain at the pump and when it comes to inflation, with prices rising on everything from gas to groceries. Lester.
Kristen Welker, thanks. The president also noting a movement of more U.S. forces into different parts of Europe, stressing that Americans will not become involved on the ground in Ukraine, but they continue to want to bolster NATO allies and deter Russia from moving beyond Ukraine. Right now, we know that there are reports of fighting and attacks virtually across the whole of Ukraine by Russian forces, aerial attacks as well as on the ground, and there have been reports of casualties on both sides. Joining us now from Moscow is NBC News senior international correspondent Keir Simmons. Keir, you have to wonder if Vladimir Putin had already baked in the pain and the cost of these sanctions. What's the reaction there?
Well, the Kremlin would have been watching closely, Lester. I heard some Russian banks named there by the president, VTB Bank, for example, that are crucial to the Russian economy. So clearly that will have some impact. That being said, the issue that Kristen was talking about there, about whether Russia will be removed from the SWIFT system, I think the Kremlin will pay attention to those remarks from the president, that there does appear to be some kind of a gap between the view in Washington and the view in Europe. The Kremlin will be latching onto that. I think that's one issue. I think another issue, though, tonight, Lester, is exactly how much does President Putin understand and know? What is he being told by his advisors? We saw him just today meeting with business leaders, and Lester, he told them Russia remains a part of the global economy. We are not going to damage the system of the world economy in which we ourselves exist. It raises the question, and this is a question that many are asking, that inner circle around President Putin, are they giving him the advice that he needs, or are they giving him the words, the advice that he wants to hear? We saw just earlier this week President Putin dressing down a senior intelligence officer, someone he has known for decades, a former member of the KGB. When you think about the way President Putin treats even his inner circle, again, it's raising this question as this conflict plays out in Ukraine. And remember, President Putin is making all of the decisions here. Are the people around him telling him exactly what he needs to know? Are they giving him a rosy picture of how this may play out? I think that is a question for the conflict, and it's a question for the economic picture too. As people here in Moscow, Lester, going to the banks today to try to withdraw dollars because of the crashing currency here in Russia, Lester.
Keir Simmons, thank you very much. An economic battlefield and then a real battlefield, certainly in Ukraine right now. That's where NBC News chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel joins us. Richard, you're moving into another night. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What do you expect?
So as we were talking earlier before the president came out, there had been speculation before this began that Putin might take a small option, that he might just take a piece of Ukraine, potentially a piece that Russia already held, the separatist-held area. But when we woke up this morning, when we woke up to the news that the war was beginning, it was clear that this was a total campaign. Russian forces first began with airstrikes, and then they moved in from the south, from the north, from the east. And initially, throughout most of the day, they were targeting military targets. They were targeting airfields, satellite facilities, radar installations. But now, as we are approaching night two, or the second period of darkness of this conflict. It seems that the Russian forces who've poured into this country on tanks are making their way toward population centers, still in those three directions, one from the south, one from the east, and another from the north. And the three cities primarily are the main cities here in the south, including Mariupol, Kharkiv in the east, and the capital of Kiev. And there are great concerns about what will happen when Russian troops reach this city. Russian troops are already right now approaching some of the outer areas of Kiev after having taken an airfield to the north of the city. So I think we're at an inflection point right now where the first phase of this operation was to blunt the Ukrainian military, and the next might be to either pressure the cities or occupy the cities with the goal of toppling the government. And finally, I think one thing that struck out to me in listening to President Biden was that he's anticipating that, based on what he was saying, that this could be a prolonged conflict for Russia, that even after the military is potentially no longer able to put up a face-to-face fight because the Russian military has an overwhelming superiority, that there will be a period of weeks or months, he said, when you could see civil unrest, where there will be a resistance movement in this country. And that would be an Afghanistan-like experience that both the United States and Russia shared.
Richard Engel inside Ukraine. Richard, thank you very much. Another headline from the president's remarks we should point out is the president saying the U.S. is prepared to respond to any cyber attacks that Russia may launch this way in retaliation for those new sanctions. I want to bring in NBC News national security and military affairs correspondent Courtney Kuby, who was at the Pentagon. And Courtney, we don't really have a picture of this giant battlefield. This is a huge country we're talking about, somewhere, I guess, close to the state of Texas. But what do we know about all those forces we've been watching gather over the weeks and months? The tanks, the amphibious units, the potential airborne troops. What do we know about their disposition and what's happening on the ground?
So we know that they have been arrayed all around Ukraine, really surrounding it on nearly all sides for a matter of weeks now. And it's not just the tremendous number of forces there. We've heard everywhere from 175 to 190,000 total Russian forces there. But it's really the capabilities that have gotten U.S. officials and defense officials who I've spoken with who they're really concerned about. Among those capabilities that they're worried about are cruise missiles. Now, we've already seen Vladimir Putin unleash somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 missiles on Ukraine in just this opening salvo. In addition to that, he used 75 military planes, that's fixed-wing bombers, fighter attack aircraft, on a number of airstrikes. And we should point out that was all over the country. It was not just in the east. While it was concentrated mainly in the east, it was all over the country. Some of the targets included military defenses, barracks, ammo depots, airfields, taking out the Ukrainian military aircraft. So far, defense officials don't have any assessment on casualties, civilian, Ukrainian military, or even Russian military, but they are watching that. That's something that they're trying to get a better sense of. It seems as if what we saw happen overnight, Lester, was sort of the very beginning part of this military kinetic phase of this military campaign. What that means is the defense officials are concerned that this is really just the beginning of what Vladimir Putin has planned in Ukraine. They expect to see more cruise, short-range, medium-range ballistic missile strikes in the coming hours and days. One of the concerns is that Vladimir Putin may decide to go after some Ukrainian civilian population centers. And what that means is, in the effort to go after both Ukrainian military and Ukrainian government infrastructure, some of those are located where Ukrainian civilians are living. There's a very real concern that that could lead to casualties among civilians in the coming days and weeks ahead. That's something that we're watching for. Despite the fact that it doesn't seem as if there's ongoing cruise missile and airstrikes right now, there is a very real belief, according to a U.S. military assessment, that those are still going to be ongoing in the coming days, Lester.
And Courtney, one of the things we had talked about prior to the attack was that Russia would likely do some kind of electronic warfare, so essentially punch the lights out. You noted when I was talking to Richard, the lights were on. He had communications. What do we know about that?
Yeah, that's right. So the assessment among the U.S. military was that there would be a large-scale cyber and electronic warfare campaign in advance of this kinetic phase. We did see some cyber attacks, but the electronic warfare or the jamming didn't really materialize. A senior defense official said it's not outside the realm of possible that that will still happen. But what's interesting is we actually saw that materialize, the fact that they didn't use that jamming in a widespread manner. We saw that materialize in how the Ukrainian military was able to respond and defend against this initial salvo. The initial military assessment, U.S. military assessment, was that if they used this jamming in the cyber, it would really decentralize the Ukrainian military's response or their defenses. Because the Russians didn't do that, the Ukrainian military was actually able to mount a pretty stable and robust response to the Russian offenses overnight. The question is, will Russia see that and then respond with jamming in the coming days? We should also point out, though, Lester, we heard a little bit from President Biden about some additional U.S. troop deployments. Well, a senior defense official is now saying that at the president's direction, Secretary Austin has authorized 7,000 more U.S. troops to move forward to Germany in the coming days. These will most likely be used either for additional unilateral deployments into the Baltic area or potentially if the NATO response force is activated.
All right, Courtney Kube with a lot of information there from the Pentagon. Thank you. I want to go to NBC News national security analyst Jeremy Bash. Jeremy, give us your assessment of where things stand right now and where they may go based on what the president laid out.
Well, yesterday, Lester, 40 million Ukrainian citizens were living in a democracy, and today they're living under Russian occupation. And so the president's very muscular, determined speech, I think, laid out exactly what's at stake. It's not only about imposing economic costs on the Russian Federation, which today's announcements will do, but also the president said that Putin's ambitions go beyond Ukraine, and he wants to reestablish the Soviet empire. And the president said the United States of America is fully committed to stopping that from happening. So, Lester, today I think, it's a consequential day because the post-Cold War era is definitively over. And the president today made clear the United States is going to oppose the Russian Federation and Vladimir Putin in its effort to reestablish that empire.
Well, but let me stop you there, that the Russians are in Ukraine. The president didn't seem to offer any idea that these sanctions would suddenly make these tanks turn around and go the other way. So is all this really aimed at protecting NATO now? Basically saying you cross this line, you got away with it, you don't get to cross the next line, which would put you in direct conflict with NATO and the U.S.?
Definitively, Lester, we're drawing a line at the NATO Article 5 countries, those countries that we are duty-bound under our mutual treaty to defend. But I think also the sanctions are designed to raise the costs on Putin. And I think over time, through arming the Ukrainians, we're going to impose other costs, hopefully drive him out eventually. But I don't think anybody's under any illusions, and the president seemed pretty clear-eyed. This is going to go on for a long time. Russia will be in Ukraine, but they're going to pay a very heavy price.
Jeremy Bash, thank you. The economic fallout of the overseas attacks already hitting home here in the U.S. From the markets to gas prices, NBC News senior business analyst Stephanie Rule joins me with that. Stephanie, the president pointed out that it's natural, it's expected that some kind of large world event like this would rock the markets. Is this one following historical expectations or something more we should be alarmed about?
Absolutely. Any huge development, any big disruption is going to create volatility in the markets. And the most important thing to remember, investors like predictability, Lester. They want to know if it's going to rain or be sunny tomorrow. And a very clear message from the president, we don't know what Putin is going to do. But as the president said, he has his sights set beyond Ukraine. And that's why you see investors pulling out, because it's very unpredictable what we're going to get out of Putin. One thing we heard over and over, people were asking the president, why not shut down SWIFT? The United States government doesn't control SWIFT, right? It's basically an email system. It controls thousands and thousands of financial institutions over 200 countries. It's not like the U.S. government can just turn it off. Something notable, that meeting Vladimir Putin had with all of those Russian oligarchs, pay attention to who they are. Because we say all the time, Putin doesn't care if his economy suffers, about the Russian people. He cares about those oligarchs. Many of them are the ones who control those banks that are getting sanctioned.
All right. Thank you, Stephanie. That concludes our special report on Russia's attack on Ukraine. We continue to follow this story. And, of course, as events warrant, we'll pop right back on the air with the very latest and, of course, a complete wrap-up when I see you a bit later on NBC Nightly News. I'm Lester Holt in New York. Good day, everyone.